So, again, behind the term Freemason, there are many other meanings to do with admiralty law, to do with the sun,
Yeah.
Frey is also like, brothers.
Frater, yeah, sure.
Yeah, there's lots of different takes on the word. It can also mean fire, So there's lots of different meanings behind that word. We can, we could do a show just on one of these terms.
And how about the lodge then?
Lodge is interesting because, again, from a purely historical point of view, the lodge was just a physical building that these guys used to congregate in during the time that they were doing their building projects. This is what held their maps. This is what held the chart. This is where the coffee was brewing so they could go in out of the rain, and hang around. And this is also a hermetically sealed kind of place where their charts and their maps and their sacred tools of the Freemasons, the building, this place where they could go and languish and rest. And so these lodges then became the meeting places. And later on, of course, when the lodges became open to non-stone masons, meaning that when speculative masonry started and other people could just join from the street, the idea was that this is also a lodge. But again, that's the physical meaning. We have to understand that there's higher levels of meaning here in the origin and etymology of these terms, and ultimately, if people have tracked my work, they'll realize that one lodge of Freemasonry has quite a lot of ability to. They're like franchises. They're like 7-Eleven or Starbucks, or they're like the McDonald's or whatever. You have a certain license to be unique. A certain amount of uniqueness is allowed, but basically they're cut out of the same franchise mold. And this is very, very important because you see there's a central, what I call the Black Lodge, which is the hidden lodge that's in the center of all of this, like the spider at the center of the web. And all these lodges are basically satellites of a main lodge. And the people who write on Freemasonry and a lot of their insiders do not want anyone knowing that that is the fact. So they don't mind it, you thinking that these lodges sort of work semi-independently, and they just exist there in different countries, and that they don't all sort of connect. It's very important to realize that they all connect.
But they do, even on the official level. I mean, if you go into a city, and if you're a Mason, I've heard that you can go into, the local lodge and they are supposed to, open their arms to you, and you can go in there, and that should be, as you said, Michael, in this slide there, this is going to be a safe place, so to speak, where you can hang out for a while and, chit chat a little bit with the fellows in there.
Sure, that comes under their concept of the brethren, the brothers of the world. Wherever you go, if you're in need. Of course, this has been abused. This whole idea, because they may be helping you because you're a Mason, but they let somebody else drown. I mean, I'm talking literally here. This has actually happened.
Yeah.
Where other people can suffer hideous deaths. Certain Masonic groups have made sure that there be evacuations from war-torn lands, but everybody else can burn. You know what I mean? What kind of brotherhood is this? It's a very specific kind of brotherhood, a very selective thing.
Yes. Okay, let's look a little bit at the degrees then.
Well, basically, Jim Marrs sums it up in one of his books, Rule by Secrecy. He says that Freemasonry is formed into 3 basic lodges. The Blue Lodge, the beginning step, which is divided into 3 stages or degrees. Okay, so what he's basically saying is that the first degree, which is the Blue Lodge, is already divided into 3. But then you have the York Rite, which is composed of 10 more degrees, and then the Scottish Rite, with its total of 32 degrees of initiation. The invitation only, 33rd degree, represents the human head atop the 33 vertebrae of the back, or the spine. This is the highest publicly known degree. This quote basically tells you that they're, again, even York Rite and Scottish Rite have now blended. They may be one above the other and all of that, but basically they're one college. So, once upon a time, there used to be, in the 1700s, there was a schism, right?
Yeah.
Right now, they're pretty much consistent. They've all sort of blended together, so that's very important to realize as well. And that slide you're showing now, shows the number 33. And I always emphasize that when you see that number, the truth of the matter, is that you're talking astrotheology here, astrology, because the sun takes 33 degrees to go in and out of one house of the zodiac. There are 12 houses, of course, and that's where we find the number 12 and so many Masonic things. We have the number 7, which used to be the universal number of the planets. And we have the 33, which is the degrees it takes for the sun to go through a sign of the zodiac. And they mimic that. Jim Marrs is right. They probably are using the fact of the spine, and all of that. But what they're really using is this degrees up there in the sky, where the movement of the sun through the zodiac has always been a metaphor for man's evolution. If man is the sun, if he is the intelligent, enlightened one, then his journey of enlightenment is in 12 stages, 6 stages of darkness, 6 stages of light. Yeah, like Hercules.
Yes.
Or Joseph Campbell's famous hero of 1,000 Faces.
And then the other aspect to this is, of course, that 1/3 of 100% is 33.3333 onwards. And there we come in with the idea of the biblical reference to Lucifer and the idea that he took 1/3 of all the angels with him from heaven, and they came to earth, right? So that could be another reference here in regards to Lucifer as well.
I had no idea about that. Can you say that again? That's incredible. What's that?
Well, in the Bible, it says that 1/3 of all the angels were convinced, I guess you can say, by Lucifer to follow him down to earth to do. I don't know if they were going to do battle with human beings or whatever, but the Bible reference 1/3, and 1/3 of 100% is always going to be 33.33333. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah,
Keep in
that
mind.
is interesting.
Yeah.
Very intriguing. I mean, again, the etymology, the numerology. We didn't say it in the introduction, but my goodness, this is again when people see these terms and read these passages, they have to develop their symbol literacy. What you've said is just a perfect example, because that's how these geezers work.
Right.
Look at the symbolism. Look at the symbolism on their medals, on their flags, on their emblems, on their friezes, on their floors, the incredible murals, the use of numbers, the compass and the rule. And so this is a process of decoding. And you should not want to have a degree from some university. This is for every man to do. Every man should use his brain and his reason to decode. You don't need some special credentials to do it. It's a tremendous investigation.
Absolutely. All you need is to be at the beginning, the initial stages, to the people who are savvy to this can point out a little bit here, a little bit there, so you kind of get the idea. You start to recognize the pattern. But after that point, as you say, Michael, you really don't need anyone. I mean, let's go on your own journey and do your own interpretation, because it's a fascinating study, as we've said many times before.
Yeah, and you may be wrong and you may be right, but it doesn't matter whatever other people say. It's like what Conan Doyle, his character Sherlock Holmes, always used to advise Watson. You always do see, but you don't trust your observations. You observe, but you fail to draw conclusions from what you see because you're too timid. You've been taught to not believe in your own senses and your own eyes and your own belief systems.
Yes.
The whole human race now needs to do that, is to not wait for instruction, but to look with their own eyes and their own senses, and then also, more than that, trust the evidence of their sight. Trust what they're seeing.
Let's look at a quote here from Manly P. Hall. The next slide.
Well, this has to do with the previous quote, because Jim Marrs was talking about the 3 degrees. I've always emphasized in my work that all the corrupt lodges and fraternities of today's world wouldn't even exist without the ancient Druidism, of which these modern things are corruption, okay? And what Manly Palmer Hall is saying here basically underlines this. He says there were 3 degrees of the Druidic mysteries, but few successfully passed them at all. The candidate was buried in a coffin as symbolic of the death of the sun god. The supreme test, however, was being set out onto sea in an open boat. While undergoing this ordeal, many lost their lives. The few who passed this 3rd degree were said to have been born again and were instructed into the secret and hidden truths which the Druid priests had preserved from antiquity. So this whole idea of the ritual by fire, ritual by water, ritual by earth, ritual by air, is very, very important. You also see certain movies like The Truman Show. Remember the end of that movie where he goes out in a little boat?
Yep.
And he climbs up some stairs and he goes out through the door in the heavens.
Mm-hmm.
These movies are loaded with Druidic symbolism. And my goodness, when you come to some movies, I mean, it's just non-ending.
Yeah.
It's hard to fathom. You know what I mean?
Yes, and again, a lot of companies, MGM, Chris Knowles pointed out that a lot of these are Masonic people who are behind the production companies of the movies that are being produced as well. So it isn't at all a far stretch. We know that.
Even the fact that they have triad letters: CBS, ABC, MGM, Tri-Star.
Yeah.
When people can wake up and find out what's going on here, they're building their buildings in the design of 3-pointed edifices. Flags have the tricolors, you know what I mean? Corporate logos galore have the trident, which is like they say, for instance, the Adidas, for people who are new to this, Just go and look at the Adidas symbolism. I'm not saying they're Masonic, but it's strange that they have a Masonic pyramid on their logo. So, I mean, people start looking at these symbols.
Absolutely. Okay, so shall we dive into Masonry and Judaism a little bit, Micheal?
Absolutely. This is a very, very important subject. In the first slide there, it says that the Judaic influence in Masonry is key. It demolishes the ideas of those who posit Masonry's relative lateness. The Judites are not a recent phenomenon. They go back to the time of Akhenaten, and therefore so does Masonry. So I don't understand why so many volumes have been written trying to prove that Masonry is not old, that it only dates from, say, the 17th and the 18th century and all the rest of it. Nothing could be further from the truth. The very fact that these Judaic elements are the majority of Masonic ceremony and ritual by their own definitions, we know that Judaism is obviously very ancient as a religion, and also I wouldn't talk about the race because I don't believe the race has any antiquity whatsoever. The whole idea of the Jewish race is an utterly preposterous, meaningless thing. But let's not get into that. The idea of the religion, even if we think of Jews in only religious terms, it's obviously biblical. It goes back quite far, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So if Masonry is built out of the bricks of Judaism, I don't care how you want to cut it. Masonry is ancient, period. Splitting hairs over the matter and is just utterly meaningless. If the bricks that built this building are Judaic, it's ancient, period. Let's just start there,
Couldn't it be also that they're doing a literal interpretation of, okay, how far back can we track Masonry? And they're looking, as Martin Short talks about in his Inside the Brotherhood, that he tracks it back to the first initial, the Constitution of Freemasons that was written in the 1700s, I think, sometime. And because they cannot track it further back than that, they say, okay, so this is the first, few paragraphs that is being written on it, a few testimonies is being done by, who was it, Elias Ashmole, who pinned down a few of the first rituals that he went through or something like that. And that's why they don't take it any further,
Well, you've had Anderson and you've had Ashmole.
Yeah.
Right, you've had their leading writers who did, and I'm not saying that there wasn't a major shakeup of Masonry, and it probably needed it at that time. I'm not saying there wasn't a major reshuffling of the Mason, spring cleaning. You change things around, you update stuff. Of course, that went on, but that is one thing. To try and say that the principles of Masonry, the ideology of Masonry, is only 1700s.
That doesn't
Masons
work.
must be screeching with laughter. It's like Monty Python, The Funny Walk. They must be literally rolling around the streets with laughter when people come along with that idea. Of course, there was a reshuffling in the 1700s because, of course, they were just about to do what? They were just about to let non-Masons in. Well, it's like the opposite of bringing out the nice china when your guests arrive. They don't want the nice china lying around.
Right.
They don't want the gold and the jewels and all the other stuff lying around when they're going to open the doors to the proles. So, of course, there was a massive reshuffling because and see, I also believe that Masonry went through the shift very, very briefly without getting into the whole saga. Masonry changed its complexion at that period, not just because it was going to open its doors to ordinary people, but because its function had changed. Masonry is extremely ancient, and therefore the secret reasons why it was created, why the fraternity hierarchical structures, not just of Freemasonry, but of Illuminism and Rosicrucianism, originally they were set up so that intelligent men could have access to the secrets, right, and work at their world control, New World Order agenda. But these are programs that finally get finalized. And once you finalize a program, you shut up shop, don't you? The program has been achieved. So obviously, the Freemasons' extreme need for secrecy and its extreme need for the hierarchy did soften up because they had already accomplished by the 17th century. In my book of Atlantis, I talk about what the plan was. It was Dr. John Dee receiving, from these pan-dimensional beings, the agenda for world control. This was to do with colonialization. It was to do with grabbing all the nations and the ores and the minerals of the world. Remember, we talked about the Menzies and the Stuarts and the Sinclairs grabbing the ore in Britain, and all of this incredible land grabbing and genocide. This was a pact, and Freemasons were busy working on fulfilling the will and testament of Sir John Dee, who had been receiving through Enochian magical forms, you see, this particular world agenda. But by the 1700s and moving into the 1800s, Henrik, Britain had already accomplished so much of that goal.
Yeah.
and therefore you don't need Freemasonry to be operating in the same way. So then it flipped. It almost like a penny spinning on a table. They turned over the hourglass